is a little show we're calling Mixtapes to the Moon. And you know, I thought we'd start, despite the fact that this is all about cassette tapes at the end of the day, we're going to start with a cut from one of my favorite vinyl records of all time.
Our assembly guest today is Mr. Paul Yearout, who has devoted the past 24 years working with teenagers. Today, Mr. Yearout will speak on the subject, the now generation versus the stereo generation. Mr. Yearout.
Right, so it's not music. It's actually this traveling preacher, Tex Yearout, who back in the 60s went around to school gymnasiums. And he's basically there to tell kids how to be better teenagers. You know, how to get through this messy stage in their lives.
Well, thank you very much. It's certainly a great pleasure to be in your school today, and I do appreciate all of you taking time to come to this assembly. Of course, I don't suppose you had too much choice, but that's the breaks. I realize when I walk out...
And you know, if you're talking to high schoolers, you got to talk about drinking and driving, drinking, drugs, and of course...
Brings me to another subject I'd like to talk about, a little three-letter word that you spell, sex. You know, there's a big communication gap between your generation and mine, but it's nowhere as evident as in this area because we seldom ever talk about the subject, or we do it in some ridiculous manner, where a guy gets in front of a bunch of people like you and says, now this afternoon, children, I want to talk to you about sex. And you all sit back laughing up your sleeves because you know more than the guy speaking.
I mean, for an evangelical preacher, he's pretty funny, right? And, you know, well, he gives some really cringy advice to these kids, advice that didn't age well and that I won't play for you. It does really feel to me, listening to this for the first time, like he was really trying to build these kids up, like he was trying to help them believe in themselves.
My young friends, you are the future, the only future there is. And with your wonderful minds and great opportunities, I plead with you to prepare yourselves to lead America and our world to a bright future, free of the tyranny, the hate, and the killing that's going on all over this world today. God help us. And I know you can do it, if you will. I want to commend you on being a fantastic audience. I know it's not comfortable in those bleachers. I can't believe your fine deportment, your wonderful response. It surely says something to me about you, and this is why I have great hope in your generation. Thank you, and may God bless you.
I mean, it sounds strange to say, but listening to this guy for the first time, I kind of fell in love with him.
I'm always intrigued by parents who stand around and tell their teenagers not to...
I certainly fell in love with the way that he transported me to a different time and a different place, and the way he let me think about problems that are like 15 years in my rearview mirror, but were somehow still relatable. I don't know, it's actually hard for me to put my finger on exactly what drew me in so hard, but hooked by this record, I spent years, literally years, flipping through stacks of vinyl at Goodwills and Salvation Armies and used record stores looking for anything like this Tex Yearout lecture. And there was nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. Until one day when, you know, I went from looking in the bins, the dairy bins of vinyl, to the cassette section. And what did I find? Well, I found How to Raise Happy, Confident Kids, Rewards and Punishments. I found Chakra Hookup, Psychic Experiment with Hypnotist Dick Sutphin. And I found one of my personal favorites here, Light Her Fire, How to Ignite Passion and Excitement in the Woman You Love. I mean, it was tape after tape, recording after recording of lectures and instructions, hypnotists and gurus, giving advice not just to teenagers in gymnasiums, but folks of all ages with every problem imaginable. As I said before, I don't quite know why I was pulled into this thing, but I was, and as a result, this was a big deal for me. And it sparked a very small question, which was, you know, why on this? Why on cassette tape, but not on vinyl record? Now, fortunately for you all who paid to be here, the answer to that question is pretty interesting. And it also says, surprisingly, a whole hell of a lot about what is going on right here and right now. As I'm about to argue, the story of these self-help tapes is really the story of how we collectively started unraveling. You laugh now, but wait, you might agree with me by the end. And so, tonight we've got a show in 3 acts for you. We are going to go from a mall to the dark side of the moon and back, rewinding into the not-so-distant past, looking for how the hell we all ended up feeling so alone. But first, let's start at the beginning with this guy.
I'm Shad Helmstetter, and I'm glad to be with you.
Okay, well, you mind if I just jump in with some questions for you?
Please do.
Okay.
Shad here is from Minnesota, currently lives in Florida, and I called him up to discuss a life-changing shopping trip he went on back in 1981.
I was in a store in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Kmart offers gift certificates to make your shopping more enjoyable.
I like to think it was a Kmart. And, you know, he's walking up and down the aisles, checking out what's new.
And I saw Sony's first blue and silver Walkman.
It was the Sony TPS L2. And Shad, this guy, he had never seen anything like it. Believe it or not, the guy had never worn headphones in public before. But, you know, the thing was sitting out for people to try, and so, a little sheepishly, he picked it up.
I put the earphones in.
Pressed play.
And it was absolutely breathtaking and inspiring. It was, I thought it was magic.
And the thing is, Shad was not alone.
Tuning out and tuning in. About 750,000 people nationwide are doing just that.
I can turn it up loud enough so I can drown out the sounds.
It just puts you in your own world all by yourself.
I mean, where this Walkman went, these surreal, transcendent experiences seemed to follow.
I remember vividly that walking or roller skating or dancing, there was this kind of disconnect from my normal everyday experience.
This is Juliette Christensen. She is a history of design at the University of London. She has dug deep into the history of the Walkman. And she says for her, this first experience was so disorienting because prior to this moment, life felt sort of like a documentary, like her eyes were the camera's lens capturing the world around her. But with the Walkman, once she put those headphones on, it was almost like, I don't know, like the cameras zoomed out of her eyeballs, turned around, pointed back at her, and there was this little director in her head suddenly calling action.
Suddenly I'm in this film, right? And I'm the star. The protagonist.
I'm singing in the rain.
Gene Kelly tap dancing through the streets.
In the rain.
Or perhaps an action hero running from the bad guys, or a teenager in love for the first time all over again. Anyhow, back inside of that Kmart.
I recognized then that Sony would sell millions of them and others. And
Shad was still standing in the electronics section, still a little bit gobsmacked, but he started imagining the implications of this blue device.
no, that's correct. But I wasn't thinking about it in terms of music, which is how everyone else was probably thinking about it at that time. I was thinking about it in terms of the tool to rewire the brain. I mean, what if we could change how we think by listening to cassette tapes?
Now, as out there as that idea might sound, it did have some grounding. Shad, he believed in the power of repetition. Back in the 60s, he had been stationed with the Navy, and he was told to learn Spanish and do it
And
fast.
when you're in the military and you're told to do something, you tend to do it. And so
imitate the Spanish words as closely as you can. ¿Quién es él?
Es mi padre.
He got himself a reel-to-reel tape player, some Spanish language tapes, and started listening to them over and over.
¿Quién es él?
Es mi padre.
And over and over.
¿Quién es él?
And over.
Es mi padre.
And over again.
I became reasonably fluent in a fairly short period of time, and that notion stuck. And I thought, well, if you can learn a whole new language by listening to it repeatedly.
You know, why couldn't you learn other ways of thinking doing the exact same thing?
To be more confident, for instance. And when I held that Sony Walkman in my hand, I remember thinking, now anyone could do it.
And so what does Shad do? He gets himself a microphone, a recorder, and prepare yourself, because here is what he made.
You are incredible. That's right. You have a lot going for you. You always did. And now it's time to let yourself live out the incredible potential that you were born with. You've had it all the time. You were born to be an exceptional human being. And each day you give yourself the winning words of self-talk that say, I like myself. I'm glad to be me. I like myself. I'm glad to be me. I like myself. I'm glad to be me.
Anyone feeling more confident? How about cringy? I personally kind of like it, but even if you hate it, what you have to give Shad is that he was on to something here.
I worked for the company back in the records days, and it was going nowhere. It kind of had to shut down parts of the business to keep it surviving.
That's a guy by the name of Vic Conant, and for years he had been trying to sell messages like Shad's on vinyl records with no success. But suddenly, with the Walkman and these exact same words now printed on cassette,
the business took off. All of a sudden, we were selling millions of these cassettes every month.
Like a record exec, Vic went out and signed folks like Shad to publish their material. And well, at the beginning of this boom, he says, most of their products were like Shad's, very affirming, motivational.
You can be and have all that you want in life.
Playing this tape over and over again, you will develop your unlimited potential.
As time went on, customers started to demand more and more specific products, like how to improve their memory.
I'd like to personally welcome everyone to the Mega Memory Program.
Or get better at business.
Welcome to How to Deliver Unpopular Messages, an instructional tape from American Management Association.
And eventually, my words, not his, things got, well, very, very weird.
As the group met, was similar in the large auditorium. Man they had experienced before. Idea. He was exactly in a theater. What was in store? Watching for them a movie. For the information and secure that they had. But the movie was sketchy. Did not have a plot line. All they knew that he could understand was that they worked, and as hard as he tried to begin, he was stuck.
I mean, what the hell is going on there, right? Not a tech issue. That's the way that was meant to sound. And I don't know, it's like these two dueling fairy tales, one in the left, one in the right, where if you try to follow one, you lose the other.
Okay, I'm going to tell you the trick, how the trick is done right now. I'm going to expose the contents of this idea, which, by the way, the first time it happened, it was an accident.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is a man by the name of Lloyd Glauberman, the mind behind these, quote, hypno-peripheral processing tapes. And as he told me, these tapes are almost like those like trick images where you have to cross your eyes to see what's going on in the pattern there. If you want to hear the hypnotic message that he is communicating, what you have to do is listen to what is being said between the two stories. So, for example, if the story in the right ear says,
the word feel,
in the left ear's story, what often followed was
the word better.
Okay.
So the listener at that moment in time, the only thing that's actually available for that split 2 seconds is feel better.
Now, whether you have any belief in that helping anybody, what's true is that thing could not have existed without the Sony Walkman and headphones to deliver it. I mean, it's stereo sound in a way that has to really be captured in your ears for there to be that full experience. And I mean, Shad's stuff that we listened to earlier, that certainly would not have been successful without this thing. I mean, can you imagine sitting in your living room with a stereo system and you're listening with your partner or your roommate next door to a tape telling you, I like myself, I'm glad to be me? Like, it just doesn't work. And so to me, at least, as I was digging into this, I started to think, okay, this blue box, this was responsible for this whole self-help craze of the 1980s. However,
I could pick that apart as a critical theorist of media by saying, well...
Please do. Pick it apart, yeah.
Okay.
Again, Juliet Christensen, who says, that's not the whole story here.
There's something else as well, which is that the kind of period of success of self-help, right, the 1980s, when it really kind of came to prominence, was a particular social and political climate.
You know, she says everything else that was going on in the world at that time, that was sort of important too. And that the world's most influential man at the time was a guy I'm sure everyone here in Oak Park was a huge fan of, a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan. And yes, well, he's remembered for making big government the decade's boogeyman. What's often forgotten by liberals is that, well, he cast the American individual as our nation's hero.
If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land, we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before.
He even wrapped this in some pretty self-helpy language.
There are no constraints on the human mind, no walls around the human spirit, no barriers to our progress except those we ourselves erect.
I mean, he seemed to be almost
Take care of yourself, be the best version that you can be. It's all about you and you and you.
Nothing is impossible. Man is capable of improving his circumstances beyond what we're told is fact.
And when this political message collided with this personal technology, Juliet Christensen says, that is when self-help exploded. Like a chemical reaction, both parts had to be there. And once they were, the blaze was almost impossible to contain. Which to me at least makes these tapes so much more than just some woo-woo fad. I mean, seen in this light, they were an early manifestation, a warning maybe, of where we were headed.
So why was this such a big deal?
Why was the Walkman such a big deal?
Yeah.
Because you could choose your own music. I mean, it's simple as that. You could choose the sounds that you wanted to listen to.
Which of course meant that you could listen to what you wanted to listen to, and you could listen to whatever it was that you wanted to listen to.
Which can be kind of joyful, but radically alters your relationship with society.
Now, to see what she means by that, and hopefully feel what she means by that a little bit, we've done a little experiment tonight. I have no idea if it's going to work. But to kick off sort of the results section of this experiment, does anybody want to tell me sort of you walked into this place, you were given a QR code, you snapped a photo of it, you put your headphones on, and you walked through the space, and you heard my voice saying a thing or two, and then there was a bed of music. And I'm just curious if anybody will tell me sort of, what were you feeling in your body during the musical portion, as you were staring up at the corners or whatever? What were you feeling? And if nobody raises their hand, I will call on people, so the extroverts need to do the introverts a favor here and throw their hand into the air. Right there in the front. Interesting. And what about inside your body, like in your bones? Was there tension? Was there optimism? What, anything? In a silo. Okay. Anybody else? I'm looking for sort of what's going on internally. Yep, way back there in the back right. Not the intention, but excellent. Okay, right there also in the back. Felt like lo-fi music. Again, I'm going to say it once more. Internal experiences. What were people feeling? Were they feeling anything? And if you weren't, that's okay too. But yes, they're in the back. Okay, we've got some anxiety. Does that jive for anybody? Does anybody not feel anxiety? All right. Okay, we've got calming, we got anxiety. Anybody else here? Okay, we got excitement. Okay, well, I think we've basically proven that the experiment worked here, at least according to 3 people here, which was, there were 3 different soundtracks and 3 different sort of guided tours you were given one of the 3. The first one was me saying, I know nothing about architecture, or Frank Lloyd Wright. Think of this as a mall. The second one was referencing the fact that this building was constructed because the original Unity Temple here was hit by lightning and burned down, and that fire was a real theme in Frank Lloyd Wright's life. 10 years after this building was built, a deranged man came to his house in Wisconsin and burned it to the ground, killing his wife and kid. And then 10 years after that, another one of his homes burned down, this time because of a telephone wire. And then we put some really scary music under that one. And then the last one was sort of here, this is me trying to pretend that I know anything about architecture, and here's what Frank Lloyd Wright said about this, and isn't this positive and lovely, etc. So, as we see, you all had your own sort of personal experience, unbeknownst to anyone else. And here's the reason we did that. Because before the Sony Walkman, this numbingly common, fragmented experience, it wasn't possible. I mean, this device allowed us for the first time to collectively see, but individually experience. To sit together here, or walk together there, while remaining worlds apart. And this, it seems to me, is the world that these tapes portended. A world with a new meaning of the word together. A world where not only our sounds could be personal, yes, but our truths and our realities as well. Alex Overington, ladies and gentlemen. All right, for Act 2 here, I thought we should widen the aperture a little bit because, well, the 1980s was certainly a moment where this sort of fragmentation went into overdrive. It didn't start or end there. So I am very excited to invite up to the stage, or rather, the little seats right below the stage here, the Alan Grant McClear Professor of History at the University of Chicago, Professor Adrian Johns. Okay, well, so I asked, this is the second time we've done this tonight, and so I asked before the first one how you would grade the performance so far as a professor, and so how about round 2 here? Where are we at? You put us at a B, I think, last time, so where are we at now?
No, this is clear A grade stuff.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
I know which side the bread is buttered. Go on.
Okay, well, so talk to me a little bit. Who the hell are you? Like, I gave your title and your name, but who are you and what are you interested in?
I'm a historian. I do history of science mainly.
Okay.
And really what I'm interested in is how different systems, technologies of information and communication and media have interacted with society to shape what we can know over about 500-year period. So I really start in the 15th century and I come right through to now. So I do things occasionally about, the fights about intellectual property in today's world as well.
Okay, well, so that's a wide span of history here. Do you have feelings on the cassette tape, or did I pick the wrong man to be here with me here tonight?
I do have feelings on the cassette tape. I actually brought a mixtape with me.
Okay.
So this is a mixtape.
What do we have here in your hand?
So this is a mixtape that I made in about 1980 when I was about 15, and I've carried it with me ever since. And it has the title that I wrote, and it's faded, or you can almost not read it at all. What Happened, Mud? Which is what
What happened, Mud?
Mud. So this is something that an audience member shouts out in a live recording by Muddy Waters, done in about 1970 or so.
Okay.
And
did you tape this off the radio? Did you make this off of vinyl? What did you do?
I think some of it's off the radio, most of it's off vinyl. I used to live in this very parochial, conservative English town in the middle of nowhere, and so I bought up. For some reason, I got obsessed with Chicago blues, and I bought up every LP that I could find, most of which from Muddy Waters, because that's all you could get in rural England. And so this is my mixtape of Chicago blues. And it actually, those of you who are of a certain age, like I am, will remember that mixtapes were deep and profound things, right? They're utterly romantic. And the idea of mixtapes was largely that being a teenage boy, you are a deep feeling melancholic individual. And the thought of this is that you put your life and soul into the narrative that forms the mixtape. And because it's a tape and not something like, it doesn't work with CDs, it doesn't work with MP3s because you can flip between the tracks very easily. With cassette, you can't. So when you give it to somebody, typically somebody of the other sex who you want to know better, you want them to know you better, they are effectively forced to go through the narrative that is formed by the tracks that you put on the cassette, right? Right? Do you remember this?
Right.
Yes. And so this one actually wasn't made for somebody else. This was made for me, but I did try it with other people.
Did you have any success?
No, absolutely none. Except that there's a reason why I keep this one, which is that for one thing, it sort of primed me to think that Chicago was this incredibly exotic, kind of sexy place. And so when I landed at O'Hare Airport first time in about 1988, before I'd left the airport, I had this soundtrack going through my head, and I was thinking, I want to move to this city. And it in the end did, which is good. And it's never left me, actually, that sense. The other way in which it worked was that in October '87, when I was starting graduate school in England, there was a young woman who showed up also to start graduate school in the same place, who graduated from the University of Chicago. Her name was Alison Winter. And in the nature of these things, the first day you all pile off down to the pub to get to know each other better. And she said she was from Chicago, and I said, oh, so do you know about Chicago blues music? And she said, yeah, I used to go and listen to Buddy Guy, and who was it that Buddy Guy used to play with? And I brightly said, Junior Wells, because it was like one of the few, because he's on here somewhere. And she was astounded that this nerdy, glasses-wearing English teenager actually knew somebody as obscure and Chicago-centric as Junior Wells. And apparently this incredibly impressed her. So it did work then. It was a little bit indirectly. And we ended up getting married later.
So a mixtape through the back door or something.
Yeah, a bit through the back door, yeah.
Okay, well, let's from a little less of your personal life and more to your personal thoughts. Let's go back in time a little bit here, because you're sort of a book guy. If I'm a cassette tape guy, it seems you're a book guy. Yeah. And like, is there a moment with the book that we saw sort of a similar transformation where information went from being sort of proclaimed on high, and the experience was everyone sitting together, to suddenly people could have their own experience?
Well, you obviously think of the Protestant Reformation, right? The invention of printing is about 1450 or so in Europe. Obviously, a lot previous to that in Asia, but it's not a coincidence that it's 2 generations after that the Lutheran Reformation starts.
Break that apart, if you would. So, okay, you're saying 1450?
1450, Gutenberg introduces the first printing press in Western Europe. By 1500, roughly, there have been more books produced by printing in that 50 years than in the entirety of Western European history up to that point.
And how does that, and finish the thought then, connect that to sort of the Reformation?
Well, you think about what it means to be able to carry around as your own possession the Bible in your pocket. There are pocket Bibles that are produced in enormous numbers in the 17th century in particular. So in the English Civil War, for example, in the 1640s, troopers are carrying around in their buff coats, as Cromwell calls them, these little Bibles that are about the size of a Walkman, actually. And the print is tiny. It's actually an interesting thought about the historicity of reading experiences. For us to read the print on this is really hard, but they were poring over it. And there's lots of testimony about what it was like to read your personal Bible and to be taken by the Spirit at that moment. They call it experimental faith, actually, often. And it's basically a kind of death and resurrection experience. People get knocked flat. They don't eat for 3 days, and then they revive, and they've been kind of consumed by the Spirit by means of reading these Bibles. So on the one hand, these Bibles are printed so they're kind of uniform, like recordings. But on the other hand, the experience of using them is deeply, deeply personal and private.
And if you're Martin Luther, you're telling the people, don't listen to the Pope. You don't have to hear what the Pope has to say. You can have your own interpretation of God. So that...
Yeah, I mean, Luther doesn't really like poor people very much, so it kind of depends a bit who you are. But yes, that's the idea. Sola scriptura, right? Scripture alone is going to be the measure of faith. And faith is then the measure of salvation. And yeah, the idea is that it becomes this kind of like persona-forming thing, right? Your psychology is shaped by this experience. It's not like wearing headphones quite, but it's
not too far from it. Well, okay, so that's the past. Take us into the present here a little bit, if you would, because you're tell me I'm an idiot here, but it seems that the internet is sort of what the cassette tape allowed, but taken to the nth degree. Everything is now mixable. Everything is now mashable. We can insert and own media in ways we never could before.
Yeah, no, this is and the cassette tape was a key moment in creating that world. Pre-digital, which is very interesting, right? We tend to think of these things as products of the technological capacities of digital networks. But with the cassette tape, you could do this like a few years before digital stuff really started up. And one of the things about the cassette tape is that, like printing in Gutenberg's age, it made the home into a site of creativity. So in old printing houses were actually houses; they were homes typically. And in fact, in the 17th century, for a while, it was illegal to print anywhere except in your own home, in England. In the 1960s, 70s, 80s, one of the things cassette tape does is it turns the home into a site of cultural creativity, because now you can copy these cassettes, you can circulate them and all that. That has a double edge to it. One edge is the world of sharing and of creative activity that goes on and shapes how we create things in this massive world of distributed creative authorship that we have now. The other part of it, maybe a bit more sinisterly, is what does society do to regulate this? And it's really in the 70s and 80s that the recording industry and the the media industry in general, comes up with an entire multinational effort to clamp down on what it calls piracy. So home piracy, cassette piracy, video piracy, and so on. And this is now a very widespread industry that operates sometimes above board, sometimes behind the scenes, in collaboration with police forces and governments and so forth, and structures much of the information world that we inhabit.
Well, talk to me a little bit more, and maybe this is my last question, but so as everything moved online here, and as you said, you study sort of how our tools impact society, impact who we are, as the internet grew out of this sort of cassette tape culture, perhaps, how did that play with who we are in ways that the cassette played with who we are, or didn't it?
Well, I mean, there is sometimes this sense of being transported, right? That's something that people in the 17th century experienced. We experience it in different ways. One of my obsessions at the moment, actually, is to try to work out the history of how experiences of reading have changed over generations. I've just recently have a book published for what it's worth that's called The Science of Reading. And it's about how we've tried to figure out what happens to us when we read things. And you can extend the point not just from reading, but to things like listening and watching as well, viewing. Something goes through the eye, something affects the mind. How does it do it? How does it take root? How does it transform us? And psychologists and computer scientists and all kinds of experts have tried to figure this out. It's a fascinating branch of the sciences at the moment.
And do we know how the internet is? You figured out how the internet's affecting our brain, huh? You're the one guy who figured it out.
Not me. No. I mean, there are cognitive scientists and neuroscientists who do ask that question, like, what is the internet doing to our brain? And it's not all good news, right? You may be surprised to hear.
Shocker.
Yeah.
Shocker.
So it does erode attention spans. There's a reason why we all feel like we're flitting from one thing to the other, and we find it very difficult now to read Dickens, right? Because you have to really kind of concentrate. On the other hand, there is a notion called neuroplasticity that implies that some of these things are, what can one say, disciplinable. You can take control as individuals, but you need this kind of thing. You need like guidance from your cassette tapes, as it were, to take control of your experience of the internet. So there you go. You can discipline yourself to have longer attention spans and to not be just a consumer of TikTok or whatever it is.
That seems like a perfect spot to end it. Okay. Adrian Johns, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we got one more act for you here, and I thought to close this thing out, we should tell the story of what I think is the story of what is the craziest collective experience we humans have ever had, and the one guy who got left out.
Thank you. Except you don't have the effect of, is the juice really worth the squeeze? Yeah. Okay.
It's a story that was originally told to me by the guy you heard right there, Zach Taylor. He is a documentary maker and also a fellow fan of cassette tapes.
I shot and directed a documentary called Cassette, a documentary mixtape.
How many cassette tapes do you think you have?
Oh my gosh. I probably have a couple thousand.
I only have a couple hundred, anyhow. So, story here starts in the summer of 1969 as the crew of Apollo 11 are preparing to blast off to the moon. And along with all their space gear and training, these guys were carrying with them a thing that no man had ever held before.
The name of this thing was the TC-50. It looked like a sleek, elegant, minimalist aluminum brick.
And what it was, really, was a prototype of the Sony Walkman. It's a little bigger than the Walkman they would release 10 years later, a little bit heavier. They designed it specifically for the astronauts to take up with them. And the only functional difference, really, is this little red record button. And I would say this little red record button was sort of the beginning of content creation. For the first time with these things, these astronauts, and then the rest of us could record ourselves easily. Eventually, this little red button was replaced by dual-deck cassette recorders that let us record from tape to tape and curate, mix, and insert ourselves into media in ways that we totally take for granted today. And this little red button, it's actually also why they were allowed on board.
Because the gloves that these guys used, even today, I'm sure like an astronaut's glove is not conducive to like jotting down your thoughts. And I mean, the more I think about it, the more mission critical this thing is.
Mission critical?
Yeah, yes, mission critical, because they're going like Star Trek, where no man has gone before.
You know, gotta record it like no man had done before. And so, July 16th, 1969.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
These three astronauts had about a 3 days journey to get to the moon, or to get to the moon's orbit.
And as they're flinging through space, folks at NASA, of course, they were listening in to everything going on up there. And at points, they could actually hear these guys using their Walkmans, just not as
this
recorders.
This is Apollo Control at 59 hours, 9 minutes. Apollo 11 now 182,000 nautical miles from Earth, and the velocity down to 3,072 feet per second. The intermittent music that we're getting is apparently coming from the spacecraft. The crew has on board portable tape recorders with music on the tapes.
Yeah, each of the astronauts had a personalized mixtape with music on it that they brought up there with them.
And apparently the music is triggering the box-operated microphones, and we're getting intermittent music down from the spacecraft.
Now, NASA co-signed on this. The thought was we got to send them up with some tapes to record onto. Might as well fill them with music first. So
Mickey Capp, the record executive, would go ask each astronaut, hey, what's your favorite song? Okay, thank you, hold my beer. I'll come back with a mixtape for you.
And as Zach tells it, at least, the music these guys brought up there with them, it's a little peek into each of their personalities. So, for example, the straight-laced mission commander.
Neil Armstrong's cassette has this kooky album from the 40s on it.
That's an old favorite of mine. It's an album made about 20 years ago called And I Got It Moon.
He's a little hard to hear there, but if you did catch it, yes, Armstrong went to the moon with an album called Music Out of the Moon. Take a listen to it here.
Neil Armstrong, like, that was his jam.
And I mean, he played this stuff on board so much that there were times that NASA would call up and say, hey, Neil.
11, we appreciate you turning that off.
Can you turn that music off, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Story goes that Buzz, the big talking space cowboy, requested a very particular song on his tape so that the moment that they touched down on the lunar surface, he'd be able to reach behind him, pull out his tape player,
his TC50, his proto Walkman, and press play to
Fly me to the moon.
And then let me do.
Among the stars.
Are you serious?
That's the legend. That's the legend. That's how the story goes.
Yes, Buzz told this story on multiple occasions, but years later, after sobering up, he said, maybe none of that happened. I'm not sure. I don't recall.
But listen, if a whole building of rocket scientists can believe enough to send these three young men out into space, then I am going to exercise this little, faith the size of a mustard seed and believe that Buzz Aldrin reached behind his seat to play Fly Me to the Moon, because what an amazing moment.
Now, this moment, these playlists generally are the sort of things that cassette heads like me can't get enough of. And I think that's maybe all they would be were it not for the third astronaut on the mission, Michael Collins. Now, it turns out that Michael Collins' playlist has been lost to time. I contacted NASA's archives, the National Archives, the Smithsonian, and no one has any idea what was on this tape or where it is today. Which is sort of fitting.
Michael Collins is the one guy nobody knows. The third wheel. He's just the guy who, in history, they couldn't have done it without him. Do they really needed him? What did they need him for? But Michael Collins was the linchpin in all this stuff. Michael Collins was the one who made sure that they, first of all, got to the moon, and more importantly, made sure that they got home.
So, to pick the story back up. July 20th, 4 days into the mission, around 1 p.m. here in Chicago, it was time to actually go down onto the moon. And so Buzz and Neil, they crawl over to the far end of the spacecraft, the lunar landing module that they called the Eagle, sealed the airlock, and detached. Meaning that the whole time that they were down there on the moon, Collins, he was going to be up there all by himself, just waiting.
Michael Collins had 21 and a half hours, almost a full day, where it's just him alone orbiting the moon from about 60 miles above.
And not only is he alone, but half the time he's up there, he is in total darkness. Every 48 minutes, he passed around the dark side of the moon, meaning no light, no contact.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. All your systems are looking good going around the corner. We'll see you on the other side. Over. This is Apollo Control. We've had lots of signal now. We'll reacquire the spacecraft again on the 13th revolution in about 45 minutes.
Collins did this 23 times for 45 minutes at a time. All he had was his heartbeat, his thoughts, and the darkness. And while he's sitting up there, he knows that the hardest and riskiest moment of this mission is yet to come. Because, before they can go home, Buzz and Neil, they need to get off the moon. They need to blast off at just the right time so that they'll get back into the moon's orbit at just the right spot so that Collins could grab them. And as if that wasn't enough.
There was no way to test the engines on the Eagle taking off from the moon. There was no way to test it. It was completely untested. It was an unknown.
Yeah, we just didn't understand the moon's surface well enough to know how well this would go.
So what happens if the engine doesn't have quite enough gas to get them back to the orbiter? Or what if they overshoot it? And privately, the 3 astronauts gave themselves about a 50-50 chance of getting off the moon. So Michael Collins is orbiting all by himself, wondering if he's going to return to Earth alone or as part of a 3-person crew successfully having visited the moon.
This is Apollo Control. Collins has gone behind the moon on the 23rd lunar revolution. While he waits for his comrades to rejoin him for the trip back to Earth.
I mean, just picture this for a moment, if you would. On one side of the moon facing Earth, you've got Armstrong, who has just stepped onto the lunar surface and broadcast back to Earth his famous line.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And then, at that same moment, on the other side of the moon, in total darkness, totally alone, you've got Mike Collins.
So in this moment that literally the entire Earth is experiencing something together, he remains alone, disconnected, and out of touch from all of them.
Exactly. So, oh my gosh, this is what I keep going back to. This is where having a Walkman, having this hunk of aluminum with the record button, this is where this suddenly becomes, as I said, mission critical.
Because, Collins is up there. The most solitary man in the history of the universe. To calm his nerves or get the voices out of his head, he turned to a cassette tape. He pulled out his Walkman and he hit that little red record button.
And said, "My secret terror for the last 6 months has been leaving them on the moon and returning to Earth alone. Now I am within minutes of finding out the truth of the matter." Dude, if you're alone, if you're on the dark side of the moon and all you have is a Walkman, how is that cassette not your very best friend? The closest thing you have to another human being, a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on. I think that cassette is a life raft.
meets the gold of the day. Someone waits for me.
That is our show for you here tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. Again, Alex Overington. Thank you. A few quick special thanks to the folks at KQED for helping us produce this to begin with, for the folks at WBEZ for having us, Eddie and his team, thank you so much, as well as to everybody here at the Unity Temple. Big thank you to Soren Wheeler, who is here tonight for his editorial guidance on all this, to Adrian Johns for sort of bringing his knowledge and intellect, to Zach Taylor, who made this great documentary called Cassette, a documentary mixtape, and as I always like to say thank you to my wife Barbara for everything. So thank you all so much for coming again. It really means a lot, and thanks for listening. Have a good night.